The silence in our kitchen wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that has teeth, sharp, jagged, and ready to tear through 10 years of marriage. I was standing by the sink, a half-dried porcelain plate in my hand, watching the rain streak against the floor-to-ceiling windows of our custom-built home in Oak Haven, Pennsylvania. The sky was a bruised, heavy purple, the kind of weather that makes the surrounding woods feel like they're breathing against the glass. Behind me, I could feel Clara's gaze. It wasn't warm. It was a cold, simmering resentment that had been building for months, like a low-grade fever that just wouldn't break. I remembered when her gaze used to be my anchor. Now it felt like a weight dragging me into the depths. "You're late again, Julian," she said. Her voice was a flat line, often devoid of the melodic lilt that used to make my name sound like a song. There was no anger, just a bone-deep surgical exhaustion. That was worse than a scream. A scream means there's still fire. This was the sound of cold ash. I turned around slowly, my damp hands gripping the edges of the marble counter. I tried to find a spark of the woman I'd married in the shadow standing by the kitchen island. "The bridge on Route 42 was closed, Clara. There was a multi-car pileup in the fog. I tried to call, but my battery died right as I was pulling out of the law firm. I sat in standstill traffic for 2 hours just thinking about getting home to you. I even picked up those lilies you like from the stand on Fifth." "It's always something," she interrupted, ignoring the flowers as if they were trash. She slammed her crystal wine glass onto the counter, the sharp clack echoing through the open-plan house. "The car, the job, the excuses. I'm tired of carrying the weight of a man who's just there. You're like a ghost in your own house, Julian. A polite, hardworking shadow that provides a paycheck but offers nothing else. Honestly, my life would be easier without you." The words didn't just hang in the air. They suffocated it. I didn't flinch. I didn't defend myself. I just looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I didn't recognize the woman standing in my kitchen. The woman I had gone into debt for, the woman I had built this life for, had just wished me out of existence. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. I set the plate down with trembling hands, walked to the mahogany coat rack in the hallway, grabbed my waxed canvas jacket, and walked out into the downpour. I didn't realize then that walking out was the easiest part. It was what I was walking into that would change the trajectory of my life forever. The engine of my old sedan, a car she constantly belittled because it didn't match the Miller aesthetic, groaned as I pulled out of the gravel driveway. The tires spat stones against the pristine white fence she'd insisted we install last summer. I didn't have a destination. I just knew I couldn't breathe in a house where my presence was considered a burden. Every room in that 4,000-square-foot mansion felt like a monument to a decade of being told I wasn't enough, despite the fact that I was the one who had built the wealth that sustained it. I had sacrificed everything for Clara. I'd passed up a senior partnership in Philadelphia to stay in this small town because she couldn't leave her family. I'd worked 80-hour weeks at the firm, and I'd even taken on nearly $300,000 in private debt to keep her father's legacy estate from going under during what she claimed was a devastating health crisis 3 years ago. I did it all because I believed in the us she had promised me in the early days, back when we were just two students sharing a pizza on a dorm floor. I drove until the fuel light flickered, the Pennsylvania Turnpike a blur of gray and black. I ended up in a small, weathered town called Blackwood, nearly 3 hours north of Oak Haven. It was a place where the streetlights hummed with a low-frequency buzz, and the secrets felt baked into the very bricks of the storefronts. I pulled into a motel called the Rusty Key. The neon sign buzzed, casting a sickly pink and blue glow over my dashboard, highlighting the gray hairs I'd gained over the last few years. I sat there for a long time, the engine ticking as it cooled, wondering if Clara was already enjoying that easier life. Was she upstairs in our bed, finally sleeping peacefully now that the burden of my presence was gone? Or was she already on the phone with her father, planning the next move? The next morning, the local diner, the Silver Coin, was thick with the smell of burnt coffee, damp wool, and maple syrup. The air was heavy with the chatter of loggers and truckers, a world away from the sterile boardrooms of Oak Haven. I was sitting in a corner booth, staring at a plate of cold hash browns and greasy eggs, when the bell above the door jingled. A man walked in, tall, probably in his late 60s, wearing a charcoal wool coat that looked older than I was, but was meticulously cared for. He didn't look at the chalkboard menu. He walked with a purpose that felt heavy, heading straight for my table. Without asking, he slid into the vinyl seat across from me. "You look like a man who just lost a war, Julian," he said. His voice was like gravel shifting in a mountain stream, low, rough, and strangely steady. I froze, my coffee cup halfway to my lips. My heart rate spiked. This wasn't Oak Haven. Nobody here knew my name. "Do I know you? Because unless you're here to tell me the world is ending, I'm really not in the mood for company. I've had enough honesty to last me a lifetime." "No," he smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. His gaze was as cold as the frost on the diner windows. "But I knew your father, Thomas Vance, and I know why you're really in Blackwood, even if you're too distracted by your failing marriage to see the map laid out in front of you. Your family has a history in these hills, kid, a history of being pushed until they finally decide to push back. I've been waiting 15 years for a Vance to walk through that door and ask the right questions." The man who introduced himself only as Elias reached into the inner pocket of his coat and produced a thick, legal-sized envelope. It was yellowed at the edges, smelling of dust and old cedar. Or it was sealed with a thick dollop of red wax that had been stamped with a signet ring, a ring I recognized instantly. It was the crest of my father's old development firm, a company I thought had been liquidated into nothingness after his accidental death 15 years ago. My hands shook as I reached for it. "Your father didn't die of a sudden heart attack on a hiking trail, Julian. That was the story the local papers ran because Silas Miller owned the local papers back then," Elias said, leaning in until I could smell the faint scent of peppermint on his breath. "He died because he was about to talk. He was 48 hours away from filing a discovery motion that would have stripped the Miller family of every cent they own, including that house you're currently paying for. Well, he was about to tell you about the easier life your wife's family has been living on your blood, sweat, and tears for the last 10 years. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it might bruise. My wife's family? The Millers were the architects of Oak Haven. Her father, Silas, was a retired Superior Court judge. They were the ones who had looked down on me, the son of a failed businessman, since the day I proposed to Clara. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. I broke the wax seal with a steak knife. Inside were bank ledgers, aerial photos of a massive timber property in Blackwood, and a legal document dated the year I got married. As I poured over the documents, the coffee in my mug went stone cold. The pieces began to click together with a sickening metallic snap. I looked at the wire transfer records, the medical bills for Silas's supposed heart treatments, the ones I'd been paying for 5 years, emptying my 401k and taking out personal loans to cover. They were a fiction. Every dollar I'd authorized from my savings was being funneled into a shell company called Evergreen Holdings. Evergreen wasn't a medical fund. It was a private equity firm that had been systematically buying up the surrounding land in Blackwood. Land that, according to my father's original, unprobated will, was supposed to be held in a trust for me. I saw Clara's signature on the incorporation papers. She hadn't just been an unhappy wife, she had been the primary bookkeeper and the seductive distraction for a decade-long heist against her own husband. She didn't want a life without me because I was a burden. She wanted a life without me because the acquisition phase was complete. The land was secured, the money was moved, and I was the last piece of evidence left on the board that could link them back to the original theft of my father's legacy. I didn't go back to the motel. I drove straight back to Oak Haven, but I avoided our street. I couldn't look at that house without seeing it as a prison of my own making. Instead, I went to the county law library, a place where I'd spent my early years as a junior associate, grinding away to prove I was worthy of a Miller name. I needed to see the original land deeds from 30 years ago. The official records were digitized and presumably altered by Silas's cronies. Standing in the dusty, quiet stacks of the library, where the weight of the betrayal hit me like a physical blow to the stomach, I pulled the microfiche for 1996. There it was, my father's signature on a partnership agreement with Silas Miller. They weren't rivals. They were partners. Silas had used his legal position to declare my father's assets abandoned after his death, then funneled them into the trust that Clara eventually managed. Every "I love you" whispered in the dark, every anniversary trip we took to the coast, every time she comforted me after a hard day, it was all scripted. I wasn't her partner. I was her mark. I was the golden goose they were plucking one feather at a time until I was bald and useless. I realized then that my marriage wasn't a romance. It was a long con. I walked into our house at 2:45 a.m. The lights were dimmed to a soft amber glow, when the scent of expensive vanilla and sandalwood candles lingering in the air. Clara was curled up on the sofa with a book, wearing a silk robe that I had bought her for our 5th anniversary. She looked like the picture of a grieving, lonely wife. She started when the heavy oak door clicked shut, her eyes wide with what I now realized was calculated performance, not genuine concern. "Julian, you've been gone for 30 hours. No call, no text." "I was about to call the sheriff," she said, her voice trembling with a practiced fragility. She stood up, reaching out for my arm, her touch feeling like ice against my skin. I was so worried. I didn't mean what I said in the kitchen. I was just tired. "I'm sure you were," I said, my voice sounding hollow and metallic. I didn't pull away. I just looked at her hand on my sleeve. I reached into my coat and tossed the yellow envelope onto the mahogany coffee table. It landed with a heavy final thud, sliding across the polished surface to tap against her half-empty wineglass. "Tell me about Blackwood, Clara. Tell me why I've been paying for a pacemaker for a man who I just saw listed in the local sports section for winning a golf tournament in Florida last weekend. Tell me about Evergreen Holdings." The color didn't just drain from her face. It vanished, leaving her skin looking like gray parchment. She didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She didn't try to deny it. That was the most chilling part of the entire ordeal. The sweet, tired Clara who complained about my work hours vanished in an instant. In her place sat a woman with eyes as sharp and cold as a winter morning in the Alleghenies. "You weren't supposed to go to Blackwood," she whispered, her voice losing its soft lilt and turning into something jagged. "My father, he said you were too blinded by your own morality and your need to be the hero to ever look under the hood. You were the perfect provider, Julian. You worked, you paid the bills, and you never asked questions because you were so desperate for us to be okay. You were a dream come true for a family that needed a fresh infusion of capital to survive the recession. You were an investment that paid off better than we ever imagined." "Is any of it real?" I asked, the pain finally cutting through the anger. "The last 10 years? The wedding? The night we talked about names for the kids we'd never have because you said the timing wasn't right?" "The timing was never going to be right." "Ah, Julian," she laughed, and the sound was like glass breaking in a dark room. "Julian, the only family I care about is the one that has my last name. The money you lent us is gone. The land is legally in our names now. You can leave tonight, or you can stay and keep paying the mortgage on this house while I figure out the divorce papers. But if you try to fight us, remember who my father is. He didn't just sit on the bench. He built the courthouse. You're just a small-town lawyer who got lucky for a decade. If you were in Julian's shoes, standing in your own living room realizing your entire marriage was a strategic, multi-million-dollar heist, what would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments. I left the house again that night, but I didn't head for a motel. I drove into the industrial heart of the city, where the neon signs flicker and the air smells like wet pavement and diesel. I was meeting a man named Marcus. Marcus had been the lead prosecutor in the county until Silas Miller had him disbarred on trumped-up ethics charges 5 years ago. He was a man who had lost his career, his reputation, and his sobriety to the Miller family's reach. We sat in a booth at the back of a dive bar called The Gavel. Ironic given our company. The air was thick with the smell of stale beer and the ghosts of old regrets. I showed him the ledgers I'd taken from Elias. Marcus scanned them, his eyes lighting up with a predatory, vengeful glow I hadn't seen in years. "This is it, Julian. This is the evergreen trail we could never find because we were looking for cash in suitcases. They were moving land titles like chess pieces. Amina, but paper isn't enough to sink a man like Judge Miller. He has the sheriff in his pocket, the mayor at his dinner table, and half the city council on his payroll. To kill the king, you don't just need a sword. You need a televised execution. We need him to admit it on tape. We need the daughter to break. And that means you have to go back in and play the part of the fool one last time. The next morning, I did something that felt like swallowing broken glass. I called Clara. I sat in my car outside a diner, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, and I made my voice shake with a practiced, pathetic tremor. I played the part of the broken man she thought I was, the gullible Julian. I told her I was sorry, or that I had overreacted because of the stress at the firm, and that I realized we were more important than some old papers in a diner. I told her I didn't want to lose her. I moved back in that afternoon. Every second was a choreographed performance that drained my soul. I had to kiss her cheek while smelling the same vanilla perfume she wore when she was lying to my face about her father's health. I had to eat the roast chicken she prepared, listening to her talk about new curtains for the guest room, while I secretly tucked high-gain digital recorders into the hollowed-out bases of floor lamps. I was living with a predator, pretending to be the slowest, easiest prey she had ever caught. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the wire taped to my ribs like a brand. I wasn't just a husband anymore, and I was a recording device with a heartbeat, waiting for one slip of the tongue that would bring the house down. The opportunity I needed arrived 2 weeks later during the Millers' annual Founders Gala. It was a sea of tuxedos, expensive bourbon, and the kind of hollow laughter that only comes from people who think they are untouchable by the law. The Miller estate was lit up like a palace, a monument to stolen wealth. While Clara was in the ballroom, playing the radiant, devoted wife in a shimmering emerald gown, I slipped away. I didn't head for the bar or the terrace. I went to Silas's private study in the north wing, a room that felt like the cold, dark heart of the Miller Empire. The room felt like a tomb, heavy mahogany drapes, the cloying scent of old leather, and expensive cigars that smelled like funeral incense. I knew Silas was old school. He didn't trust digital encryption he couldn't see. He kept physical trophies of his conquests. I spent an hour painstakingly searching the room, my heart hammering against my ribs, until I found a hidden latch in the floorboards beneath his massive oak desk. Inside was a small, fireproof safe. My breath hitched. This was it, the belly of the beast. My hands were slick with sweat as I gripped the dial. I tried the combinations I knew. Clara's birthday, the date Silas was sworn in. Nothing worked. Then I tried my father's birth date. The man Silas had betrayed, robbed, and buried. The lock clicked with a heavy metallic sound that felt like a bell tolling for the Millers. Inside wasn't just cash or deeds. It was an old-fashioned digital recorder with a physical tape still inside. I hit play, my hands trembling so hard I almost dropped the device. It was a recording of my father, 48 hours before his accidental heart attack, arguing with Silas in this very room. "You can't do this, Silas," my father's voice rang out, sounding exhausted but defiant. "The land in Blackwood belongs to Julian's trust. I've already prepared the discovery motions. I'm going to the feds on Monday. I won't let you rob my son." Then came Silas's voice, smooth and chillingly calm. "Thomas, you're a dreamer. Federal authorities take years. I take minutes. Julian will be fine. He'll marry Clara, and he'll never even know he's paying for his own inheritance with his own salary. Now take your heart medication and go to sleep. You look tired, Thomas. You look like you're about to have a very long rest. Just take the pill." The silence that followed on the tape was deafening. My father hadn't just been robbed. He'd been murdered by a man he called a friend, and my wife had known every second of it. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in Julian's story and share your thoughts in the comments. I was so consumed by the ghost of my father's voice that I didn't hear the heavy oak door creak open. I didn't hear the soft rustle of silk on the Persian rug until it was too late. "I wondered how long it would take you to find that," Clara said. She was standing in the doorway, her emerald dress shimmering like snake scales in the dim lamplight. She wasn't holding a wine glass this time. She was holding a compact .38 revolver, The barrel pointed directly at my heart. Her eyes weren't filled with the love I had seen for 10 years. They were as empty as a dry well in a drought. "You knew," I whispered, holding the recorder like it was the only thing keeping me from collapsing. "You knew your father killed mine. You knew the medication Silas gave him was what stopped his heart. You were in on it from the very start, weren't you? The chance meeting at the library? The whirlwind romance? It was all a setup to keep me under your thumb." "I knew he made a choice for the benefit of our future, Julian," she said, her hand remarkably steady. "And now I have to make one. Give me the recorder. We can still make this work. We can go to Europe tonight, leave this town behind, and live the life we always talked about. Just stop looking for ghosts that don't want to be found. Don't force my hand, Julian. See, I don't want to hurt you, but I will." "Clara, look at yourself," I said, taking a slow, deliberate step toward her. I could feel the sweat dripping down my back, my tuxedo collar feeling like a noose. "You're holding a gun on your husband in your father's office while a party carries on downstairs? Is this the easier life you wanted? Being a prison guard for a man who doesn't even love you? Because let's be real, once I'm out of the picture, you're the only witness left who knows about the medication. Do you think a man like Silas Miller leaves witnesses? Do you think he won't replace you the same way he replaced my father once you become a liability?" The barrel of the gun wavered, just for a fraction of a second. I saw the girl I had fallen in love with 10 years ago fighting against the monster her father had sculpted out of greed and shadow. "He wouldn't hurt me," she whispered, but the lack of conviction in her voice was haunting. It was the sound of a woman realizing she was just another asset in a ledger, a depreciating one at that. "He's my father," she added, as if trying to convince herself. The sound of heavy rhythmic footsteps approached the study. Silas Miller walked in, his tuxedo impeccable, looking every bit the elder statesman of Oak Haven, but his face twisted into a snarl when he saw the open safe and the recorder in my hand. He didn't look worried. He looked annoyed, like he was dealing with a persistent insect that refused to be swatted. "Clara, what are you doing?" Silas barked, his voice booming in the small room. "Abby, give me the gun. I'll handle Julian. He's become a liability we can no longer afford to carry. He's been talking to Marcus. I have people at the bar who saw them. He's done, Clara. Move aside and let me finish what should have been done years ago." He was always too much like his father, too curious for his own good. Clara looked at her father, then back at me. I could see the decade of psychological manipulation fighting against the sudden, cold reality of her father's utter ruthlessness. Silas stepped forward, his hand outstretched for the weapon. "Now, Clara, do it, or I'll ensure you're processed as a full accomplice to everything I've ever done. You'll go down with him, and I'll be the one who tried to save you. Decide now. Are you a Miller, or are you nothing?" Instead of handing him the gun, Clara did something I didn't expect. She reached out and pressed record on her own phone, which had been sitting on the desk. "Tell me again, Dad," she said, her voice shaking but clear.